Hello, welcome back. My name's Emma, and today I want to talk about my favorite fantasy books. This is my top 10. I'm going to use series and books interchangeably. I don't really have a big enough list that I can have a separate list for standalones, so you'll just have to deal with that. But before we begin, here's some things to know and some honourable mentions. So, a couple of things to bear in mind. 1. The Lord of the Rings is something I adore and love, but I'm not putting it on the list because that's just kind of boring. If you want, you can imagine a special place at the very top that it's, something above the list that it sits, just floating like a little fantasy god. But, I don't want to take up a space that could be used for something else. Another thing to bear in mind is I'm giving one spot per author, so there's authors who've done multiple series and multiple books, but I'm going to try and stick to one just to keep things more varied. Please note that I am recording this in late November 2022. At the moment, I still haven't read Shadow of the Gods, Grace Kings, Justice of Kings, or Rage of Dragons, so they're not on the list because I've not read them. Okay, I'm also going to run through some honourable mentions. So, first we have the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This could honestly switch places with 9 or 10 on my list. It is fantastic, it is very unique, it is a world that we've not really seen from fantasy before. It's a very harsh world that N.K. Jemisin has created, but it really goes into some interesting places, and yeah, I'm going to join the voices of those that say you really need to check it out. Malazan by Stephen Erickson. So I've read the first 2, but it's been a while, and I really think I need to give it another go before I'd feel confident putting it on any list. I do recognise that the writing that I remember was really special and really fantastic. There is a lot of good prose on display in those books, but I want to come back to Malazan before I place it on any lists. Banned and the Banished by James Clemens. I recently did a whole video about this. I think if it wasn't for some of the iffy elements towards the end of these books, I think they'd still be some of my favourites. There's some nostalgia there, but there is also some just decent storytelling and some really good fantasy. House Under Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is fantasy, but make it ultra adorable. I love every one of those kids, and if they were real, I would also want to adopt them myself. If you're in the need for like heartwarming fantasy with some gay characters, this is one to have a look at. Fifth Wake by Brian Curry. This is a bit of a weird one. It's actually a book I did as a review book swap. So I've spoken to Brian Curry, but this story ended up being really interesting, and I still think about it to this day, even though I think it was like 7 years ago that I read it now. It's characters jumping from different worlds. It's sort of like Doctor Who meets probably Rick and Morty, even though Rick and Morty wasn't a thing when he wrote this. Really interesting, but it was a bit too longer that I read it for me to confidently put on the list. Okay, now that is out of the way, let's get down to the top 10. Number 10, Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. So, like I said in the honourable mentions, this could probably switch places with one or two other things from the honourable mentions. And this originally wasn't even going to be on the list, but the more I thought about it, I realised that even if it's not necessarily a book I would rush to reread again. I just think it does something so different. And the biggest difference is in the structure. So something huge happens, we have what would normally be the final fight, but where other books would kind of quickly wrap up and give you an epilogue, this has another chunk of the book left to go, because the aftermath of those events is just as, or if not more important than the big fight. So I think it's a really great book. It's really special. So that's why it's going on here. Number 9, the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. And I'm saying Muir because I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. And I'm being a little bit cheeky because at the moment I've not read Nona. I've not read the third one. So in the future, this might shift around on the list. This will happen again in the list, just to pre-warn you. But there's something really special about the Locked Tomb series, in that Tamsin really messes with a lot of conventions. She doesn't tell a standard story, and then in the second book, she doesn't give you what you want. She is giving you what she thinks you need, and she is not interested in normal conventions. But meanwhile, what she is happy to do is sneak some memes into her books. So you have these crazy stories that are kind of hard to grasp, but then you have these really enjoyable, fun characters saying memes, and it somehow works. I think the only hard thing is that I fell really hard in love with Gideon, and for various reasons, she's not really in book 2. I can't say more than that because we'll be getting into spoilers. So I did miss that presence quite a lot in Harrow, and I'm wondering how I'll feel for Nona. But this series does fantastic things, and it's great that it's gotten the love it has. And I think that just happens when you put gay necromancers in your stories. I think more people should do that. Number 8, His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. Booktube, what are you doing? I hardly ever see anyone talk about His Dark Materials, despite it being such a... How do I even describe it? It's sort of on the level of Lord of the Rings for breaking new ground, doing new things. No, it is not a children's book. It is not a young adult. It is an adult book that just happens to feature children as its main characters. This book goes places. It goes hard. And I just encourage everyone to read it, because the revelations that happen along the way are incredible, and you just fall in love with Lyra and Will, who are just fantastic protagonists. I'm going to tell you one of my favourite moments, which will encapsulate a lot about these characters, in Subtle Knife, when Lyra meets Will for the first time. She has this thing called the alethiometer that tells her the truth of anything that she asks. She can literally ask any question. And so she asks it about Will, and she finds out that Will has killed someone. And her reaction is, great, that means I can trust you. I won't say more than that, but I love these characters. This world or worlds is incredible, and there really is just like nothing else like it. Number 7, Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. I think there might be a new book of this that I've not read yet, But I love this series. It almost felt like it was a ritual where once a year or every other year when it would come out, I'd immediately buy it and read it. They're just such good fun. If you're a fan of Dresden, you need to try these because it's a similar format. You've got a modern setting, it's urban fantasy, and it's told from the point of a police officer who slowly gets introduced to the world of magic. And if you're a fan of books set in London, this is the one because the location is so central to the characters and the plot. And it's also very funny. If you really need like a fun series, I really encourage people to try this. My only slight issue is that Ben Aronovich's, or these books in general, have been turned into comics, or there are like side stories that are now comics, and that kind of complicates the order of the stories. I've completely ignored them, to be honest, but it has made it hard to know when a new proper book has come out. So just start with Rivers of London and you'll be fine, and you'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. We'll get this together. So yeah, Rivers of London is a lot of fun. I encourage everyone to try it. Number 6, Perdido Street Station by China Mieville, or the Bass-like novels? Is that what they're called? So again, this is one where I've only read the first, but I've read a lot of other China Mieville books, and I just think he's a fantastic writer. But Perdido Street Station, so unique. When I first read it, there was just really nothing like it. It was weird, it was gritty, you had these like constructs of things, people who've had arms replaced with tentacles and things like that, multiple fantasy races, but then there's all of this like politics going on in the background. It is a fairly political novel, but just in the sense of like the ordinary people being angry at the establishment, and things like that. Yeah, it's chunky, but I really encourage people to try it if they are craving something different from their usual fantasy. Number 5, and there might be some recency bias on here, and some people might say don't favourite something you're in the middle of, but I'm breaking all the rules today, and that is the Lycanius trilogy. I'm currently in the middle of book 2, so yes, once I'm finished, this might shift, this might change, but at the moment I'm loving it. It's got a lot of tropes of epic fantasy, but I adore the characters in this, and the twists and turns along the way make it really sort of fairly addictive to read sometimes. And I love switching between the main sort of 4 perspectives we fall into by the middle of book 1, because each character and all of their stories are just equally interesting to me. If you like your epic fantasy, give it a look if you haven't. I really enjoy it. Number 4, The Gentleman Bastard Sequence by Scott Lynch. Lies of Lot Lamora is a book I managed to convince my husband to read, and he is not a reader, so that should tell you a lot. There is so much to love about The Gentleman Bastards. I think Lies of Lot Lamora might be my favourite of the 3, but then it's been a while since I've read them. I'm sure there are things that happen in 2 that I kind of misattribute to 1. They're one of the books as well they're one of the book series where the jokes in them make me laugh out loud. It's not wall-to-wall comedy or anything, but when those jokes hit, they hit hard. But equally, when something really drastic and horrifying happens, that hits just as hard in the other direction. It really is something special. You've got a heist, you've got a world with magic, but it's very limited, and our characters don't tend to have access to it. So this makes it a really good book to recommend for people who either are bored of a lot of soft magic stuff happening in their fantasy, or people who are coming into the fantasy world for the first time. It's just like such an easy recommend. You have a lot of going back into between current and past events. And the point of this is so that you can have a moment where you have a realization about something and you're like, oh, that's so clever. It's there's a heist in it, and like heist movies, you have that moment where you have a little flashback and the character goes, don't worry, I was prepared for this the entire time. Oh, I mean, that doesn't happen every time. There are definitely moments where the characters are one-upped, but the cleverness that they bring to this, the intelligence that is on display, is just so good. It's an easy recommend for like anyone who's vaguely interested in fantasy or just wants something a bit different that's kind of funny. And when are we getting that book for? That's what I want to know. It's now me and Jack. Now both of us want to know where that book is. Please, Scotland, please. Number 3, Jonathan Strange on Mr. Norrell. And no, it's not Mr. Norrell, because that's how the stupid fancy man says it on the TV show. This is by Susanna Clarke, and wow, the fact that this woman wrote this and then had to take time out for years for her health and then comes back and does like Piranesi, like what a girl boss move. She is the GOAT. She is incredible. So Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is probably one of the most divisive books on this list. I've seen a fair few people on Reddit try to give it a go because I've heard good things. And I think it is a book that once you're a few chapters in, maybe like give it 100 pages, but if you're not feeling it by then, it's not for you, unfortunately, but it very much was for me. So I'm not a big historical fantasy person, but the vibe that is going on here really works for me. I've read it a couple of times now, and I really want to do a reread this Christmas. So the setup is that this is set in the background of the Napoleonic Wars? Is that how you say that? So it's set in England during that time. And there's this realization that magic has pretty much left the country, and the only practicing, magicians are only looking at the theory, and they're pretty much doing it as like a rich man's hobby until Mr. Norrell shows up and says, I'm doing magic, and if you want to call yourselves magicians, you have to show some magic, or disband this group. So he's not he's not a sympathetic character, Mr. Norrell. He's very fussy, he's particular, and then eventually you have the second character realize that he can do magic as well, and he's kind of like the rock star. He's very cool and sweet and nice, and so you have this journey of them being friends and then switching to rivals, and this has huge consequences. But you also have this element of these sort of like fae type fairy beings who are very powerful and very frightening because of the things that they can accomplish. And one of my favorite things about it, and again, this is one of the things that's very divisive, is that we have a lot of footnotes that tell little stories about things that the fairies have done to people. And I love going down this rabbit hole of all this extra information, but I know some people really hate footnotes, so that's just going to be a taste thing. But for me, every little thing just added to the atmosphere and the background of this like alternate version of England. And let me tell you, she was onto something with the whole King of the North thing, because that is something we desperately need right now. Hell yes, give me a magic king for the North, please. Number 2 is Johann Cabal, the Necromancer. The next Necromancer on the list. I don't know what that says about me. I just love people messing with the dead and the bones. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird like that. So the first book, I could actually probably take a leave, because I feel like the last time I reread it, I walked away going, yes, that's pretty good. It's a good fun time. It's enjoyable. Probably the same level as when people reread the first Dresden and they're like, yes, okay, it's fine. But what's kind of special about it is that each book, for a while, sort of plays in a slightly different genre. So we have the detective novel, and then we have this weird, like, explorer dreamscape novel. But where I absolutely love it is the last 2 books, I think it is. Because we have a character coming back into the series who I absolutely adore. And so you have these 2 characters. One is lovely and fluffy, he's a golden retriever in something form, in humanoid form. I'll leave it there. But Johann Cabal, I think the genius of having him as a main character, kind of like Mr. Norrell, he is just deplorable. He is a horribly selfish human being. He thinks nothing of shoving someone off a cliff because they're kind of inconveniencing him. But you pair him with these really lovely people, and you end up with these really special moments. Sometimes he's just like happy to be a bit of a dick, and then other times he maybe realizes he's crossed a line. And of course, a character like this is prime comedy. There are so many good, funny moments in this. So if you're after something with a bit of a anti-hero, or just someone who's not even a hero at all, then this is a book series to try. I love them to pieces, and I really wish more people were reading them. Number 1. Come on, if you've seen any of my videos, or you've seen a couple, this should be no surprise. But to be honest, if you know a lot of booktubers, this might not be a surprise. Number 1 is the Stormlight Archive. Brandon Sanderson, man. Brandon Sanderson. So these have become so special to me in what feels like a short amount of time, even though it probably took me like a year and a bit to get through all 4 of them. But reading The Way of Kings, when I was just getting back into reading again, was such a magical experience, because I didn't feel that strongly about a book, or hadn't felt strongly about a book for years. I kind of felt, oh, maybe that's just me getting older. I don't get that spark from books anymore. I'm just gonna mostly enjoy them, and that's fine. And then this comes along and shows me I'm completely wrong. I can still feel fanatical about a book. I can still feel addicted. I can fall in love with numerous characters. And the fact that it's kind of accessible as well. The prose isn't hard to get into. This is something people mention, but I think with Stormlight that kind of helps, because it means that it's not a drag to read, even when they're over 1,000 pages each. But the complexity of them does start to grow over time. I think Rhythm of War was finally the point where I was like, oh, actually, wait, I think I might have to reread some stuff, because I'm not sure what this is and what's happening here. But even though these books go places and become really interesting because of that, I think my love for these just stems from Kaladin and the Bridge Runners. It's such a dire situation that these characters are put in. You know, Kaladin is brought to the lowest point in his life, and seeing that journey of him grow into something else is so satisfying. And that growth does continue, but there is something special about the arc to do with the Bridge Runners and the slow kind of introduction of magic and how that slowly starts to appear. I also adore the world building, the fact that, yeah, this isn't typical, I was going to say Middle Eastern fantasy. In fact, this probably does have some Middle Eastern influences somewhere, but it's not the Middle Age fantasy. You know, we have these landscapes that are so vivid in, you know, these like desert lands and these weird plants. You know, when I picture where these characters live, it is nothing like the worlds that I myself occupy, and that is really cool. I didn't want to double up things by different authors, but Mistborn could be sat on this list easily at like number 2 or 3, but that wouldn't be fair to everyone else. But Stormlight really has become something very special to me, and I just can't wait to see where it goes. So this has been my top 10. Do you think I'm insane, or do you fully agree? Or have I introduced you to some things that you might not have heard of? I really hope you give those a try if you haven't. But, you know, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Thank you very much. Bye!